What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you your favorite series, the Pokemon Card Auctions of the Week recap. Folks, in today's recap, we will be going over several more graded cards from Scarlet and Violet Destined Rivals, and we'll also be comparing several sales of the Moonbreon VMAX versus the SUNBREON EX from Prismatic Evolutions, and seeing exactly which one is top dog. I got a lot of stuff for you folks, so please stick around to the very end. Quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is the amazing people over at CantoShark.com, the ultimate Pokemon card marketplace. Let me tell you what folks, my jaw about hit the floor when I was browsing through the inventory over at CantoShark.com. There are so many TCG Grails available featuring not only Pokemon, but high-end One Piece and Yu-Gi-Oh cards as well. And new cards and product are added to their marketplace each and every week. So if you are in the market for high-end graded Pokemon cards, you need to go check out CantoShark.com. I will put a link to their website in the description of this video. Support the channel, go check them out, and let me know what you pick up. Alright folks, let's talk about some Pokemon cards, starting off with these newly graded cards from Destined Rivals. Here we have a Team Rocket's Weezing illustration rare, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $151. Here is a Team Rocket's Murkrow. We saw two sales of this card, one for $152, the other one for $162. Here we have an illustration rare Shaman that sold as a PSA 10 for $164. Here we have a Cynthia's Garchomp EX Ultra Rare that sold for $157. Here is a Hydrapal illustration rare that sold for $177. Up next, we saw two of the Ethan's Ho-Oh special illustration rare cards. One sold for $520, the other one for $565. Here we have the Rocket's Moltres EX Ultra Rare that sold for $455, while the Special Illustration Rare, which is probably my favorite in this set, sold for $710. And then, of course, we saw the Rocket's Mewtwo EX SIR. We saw two sales of this card in PSA 10, one for an even $2,000, the other one for $1,675. Up next, we have the complete master set of the Scarlet and Violet 151 cards, including promos, sold for a total of $1,100 this week. And then we saw a few modern Black Label sales. Here is an Arceus V-Star from Crown Zenith, sold as a Black Label for $3,025, while this Origin Form Dialga V-Star sold for $3,300. Here's a Black Label Charizard V from Champion's Path, sold for $2,650. Here we have a Tag 10 Gengar and Mimikyu GX from Team Up that sold for $2,150, along with this Umbreon and Darkrai GX Black Star promo, sold for $2,105 as a PSA 10. Here we have a Mimikyu Scream promo as a PSA 10, sold for $7,675 this week. And then we saw a couple of Poncho wearing Pikachu cards. Here is a PSA 10 that sold for $2,720, while this other one here sold for $3,325. A couple of more cards from the XY era. Here is a Full Art Gyarados EX from Breakpoint. This sold as a PSA 10 for $1,287. Here is a Mega Mewtwo EX from Breakthrough, sold for $1,425. From Fates Collide, we saw this Umbreon EX Full Art card sell for $1,475. And then from Evolutions, we saw this pre-release Charizard sell as a PSA 10 for $3,401 this week. From Primal Clash, we saw this Primal Kyogre EX sell for $5,127 US, along with this Pikachu EX Black Star promo that sold for $5,954 US. And then lastly, for our modern cards on eBay, we have this simplified Chinese Mew EX, a very limited print card, sold raw for $7,100. And then on to some vintage cards. We saw this iconic beauty right here, the Ancient Mew. We saw three variants of it come through in PSA 10. Here is the regular one that sold for $750. Here we have the Korean version that sold for $760. And then we saw the Nintendo era version sell for $2,320. We saw a base 2 holographic Blastoise sell in PSA 10 for $2,027. And then we saw numerous vintage CGC 10 pristine cards come by. Here's a first edition Pidgeot from Jungle, sold for $3,200. Here is an unlimited Erica's Venusaur. This one's a PSA 10 from Gym Challenge, sold for $1,975. Here is a CGC 10 First Edition Erica's Dragonair that sold for $1,325. Here is a CGC 10 Giovanni's Machamp that sold for $1,675. A CGC 10 Blaine's Arcanine sold for $3,100 this week. And then here, folks, I'm not sure where to put this, but it is a Japanese Neo 2 Reverse Holo Charizard as a BGS 10 Black Label, sold for $4,900. From the Neo series, we saw this first edition Togetic in PSA 10 sell for $910. Here is an unlimited Umbreon holo from Neo Discovery, sold for $5,100. Here's a first edition Shining Magikarp from Neo Revelation, sold for $5,200. We saw a CGC 10 first edition Tyranitar from Neo Discovery, sell for $3,100. And then a couple of cards from the E-Series, we have this Aquapolis Azumarill in PSA 10 that sold for $1,329. And then, this beauty right here, mwah. Two of my favorite cards from the E-Series came by. One is this Skyridge Gyarados Holo, sold for $5,055. The other one is this CGC 10 Pristine Feraligatr Holo from Expedition that sold for $2,375. And then we can't forget this Houndoom from Skyridge, sold as a CGC 10 for $4,100 this week. Here is a CGC 10 Rockets Moltres EX from Team Rocket Returns, sold for $1,802. Here's a Latios EX from EX Dragon as a CGC 10, sold for $3,700. Here is a CGC 10 Reverse Holo Squirtle from Team Magma versus Team Aqua that sold for $1,125. And then we saw all three of the Evolution Reverse Holos from EX Delta Species sell for $1,213. Along with this Reverse Holo Dragonite from Delta Species is sold for $2,550. Here we have a PGC 10 Gold Star Charizard from EX Dragon Frontiers, sold for $14,800. Here is a Tag 9 Latias Gold Star, sold for $6,778. Here is a PSA 8 Gold Star Umbreon from the Pop Series 5 that sold for $9,877. Here we have a Reverse Holo Espeon from Diamond and Pearl Majestic Dawn, sold as a PSA 10 for $5,945. Along with this Reverse Holo Rayquaza from Supreme Victors that sold for $7,300 this week. Here is another Holo Umbreon from Undaunted, sold for $6,100 as a PSA 10. And then here is a Charizard Holo from Black and White Legendary Treasures, sold for $1,259. And then folks, let's compare the SUNBREON versus the MOONBREON. We saw several sales of these cards as PSA 10s. Here's a PSA 10 Umbreon EX from Prismatic Evolutions, sold for $2,494. Again for $2,494. Here's a sale for $2,505. Another sale for $2,469. So, very similar prices for this card, much like the Umbreon VMAX. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for $2,400. Another one that sold for $2,400. Here's one that sold for $2,450. And then I have a nice little side-by-side shot of these guys, both selling on fanaticscollect.com this week for $2,760. So pretty much the same price for both of these cards, but which one is superior? I'm going to have to go with the Umbreon VMAX from Evolving Skies. This card's been out for about 4 years now, has tens of thousands of graded copies, and still sells for nearly $3,000, while the Umbreon EX from Prismatic has only been out for 3 to 4 months and sells for the exact same price. So I think in terms of which one's going to age better, I'm going with the Umbreon VMAX. What say you? A couple of more auctions to go over. Here is a CGC 10 First Edition Kingdra from Neo Genesis, sold for $1,230. Here we have a PSA 10 Charizard GX Rainbow Rare from Burning Shadows. Came up a bit this week, selling for $3,720. Here's a Black Label Charizard GX from Hidden Faith, sold for $4,800 this week. Here's a CGC 10 Reverse Holo Gengar from Legendary Collection. Very tough card to get in a 10, sold for $5,160. Here's a PSA 10 Black Star Promo Holo Celebi. It sold for $5,400 this week. Here is a CGC 10 Karen's Umbreon Japanese card that sold for $6,300. Here is a BGS 9.5 Daisuke Club Master Scroll card, sold for $9,300. And then here, folks, we have a lot of all of the Team Rocket cards graded by PSA. Most of them are like PSA 7s, 8s, 9s. I didn't see any PSA 10s, at least in the holos, but it sold collectively for $6,041 this week. Here is a Japanese 25th Anniversary Corporate History Deck Charizard as a PSA 9. This sold for $14,775. Here are both boxes of the Mario Pikachu and Luigi Pikachu, sold for $17,142. Here is a PSA 10 Japanese Gold Star Mew, sold for $23,533. Here we have a CGC 10 Pristine number 4 Trainer World's Championship card, sold for $26,520 this week. Which brings me to the auction of the week. I'm going to have to give to this CGC9 Ishihara GX Black Star promo that sold for $29,434 this week. Whoo, man, folks. These auctions get me hot and bothered, you see? I'm sweating. Let me know what you thought of this recap in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. As always, that's all I got for you, and I will catch you all in my next one.